So basically, I have started to see a lot of people call things reboots when they are not, and it is really starting to piss me off. And because reboots are so prevalent in today's culture, it is dang near impossible to avoid having somebody miscategorize something as a reboot. So today I am going to be creating a set of terms for what is and isn't a reboot, and every different kind of reboot on top of that. So let's just get straight into this with the first one, which is just reboots.
Hello. Reboots are symptomatic of a fundamental lack of originality in Hollywood.
Have you no shame?
Here's your check for the Animaniacs reboot, you sellouts.
What I just showed you is a clip from the Animaniacs revival. It is not a reboot, it is a revival. It does not take anything previously established out of canon, therefore it is a revival. That is what a reboot is. A reboot is when a story is remade but has next to no plot elements that carry over from the previous version. Of course, there can be some similarities, but overall the story is different. This happens most often with superhero movies, for some reason. For example, The Amazing Spider-Man is a reboot of Spider-Man by Sam Raimi. And Spider-Man Homecoming is a reboot of both of those movies I just mentioned. Batman Begins is also an example, as it is a reboot of the Burton Schumacher movies.
$5 million.
That's a utility belt, not a money belt. $6 million.
$7 million.
Also, even outside of things like this, I think it's not just superhero movies mainly. It's mainly movies that are based on a pre-existing property. Another example, of course, would be Mortal Kombat 2021, which is a reboot of Mortal Kombat 1995. Of course, there are many different things you might consider a reboot when it is actually not. Now, there is one that is, for some reason, the most common misconception. I don't know why it is, because it seems like the one that is most obviously not a reboot. But let's just get into that one now.
You see who that is? Huh?
A sequel to the hit 2016 film Suicide Squad starring Will Smith as Deadshot.
Sequels and continuations are two terms for the exact same thing. They are just meant for different versions of the same thing. Sequels are for things like movies and video games, and continuations or revivals are essentially, well, they're for shows. Sequels and continuations are when another piece of media is created that continues the story of a previous piece of media, even if the storyline has nothing to do with the previous one. As long as it is in the same universe and takes place after the previous one and is very connected to the previous one's part of the world, it is a sequel. The best example of this are things like The Empire Strikes Back, which is a sequel to A New Hope, and Saw 2, which is a sequel to Saw 1. Now, you would think people would know this, but for some reason people seem to think that some sequels are reboots. So here's an example of a movie whose sequel people think is a reboot for some reason.
This is Katana. She's got my back. She can cut all you in half with one sword stroke, just like mowing the lawn. I would advise not getting killed by her. Her sword traps the souls of its victims.
There it is. For some reason, people think that The Suicide Squad by James Gunn is actually a reboot or a soft reboot of Suicide Squad 2016. It isn't. It is a sequel. It does not take anything previous out of canon, and it continues the story of that part of the world, and it is called Suicide Squad. So, it is a sequel. Now, soft reboots are something I'm going to get into a bit later, but basically, based on my definition, they are very different from what people seem to think they are. However, some other examples of things that are actually sequels or continuations that people, for some reason, think are reboots are Spiral from the Book of Saw, which I guess could also be considered a spin-off, but I don't consider it one, and the iCarly continuation. Remakes are essentially the same as reboots, but there is one big difference. As I mentioned earlier, reboots cannot have the same storyline as the previous version. Remakes are what you get when it does have essentially the same storyline. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it has to be pretty close. Examples of this would be Rob Zombie's Halloween, or, well, the Disney live-action remakes. Before I talk about spin-offs, I do want to mention that since I just used Hobbs and Shaw as the reference picture there for an example of a spin-off, I have never seen a Fast and Furious movie, and I have no plans to see one anytime soon. I have no interest in the franchise, but I swear if they never make a movie called The Fastest of the Furious, I am going to be mad, because that is just such a good title idea. So I made this little, mock-up in Photoshop here of what that movie might end up looking like. And I mean, considering I know nothing about the franchise, and I don't know how they've managed to make 10 movies about street racing, this seems pretty accurate from what I've seen and heard about it. I mean, you have Vin Diesel there growing to the size of the Empire State Building, and you have cars flipping all over the place, lots of explosions, a group from Jurassic World running away. Yeah, I think this seems pretty accurate. But as for what exactly a spin-off is, I don't really think it's easy to describe. You kind of just know when something's a spin-off, if you know what I mean. Nobody's gonna call the Suicide Squad a spin-off of Suicide Squad, but everybody knows the Patrick Star Show is a spin-off of SpongeBob. If we are talking about a spin-off, it is obvious that it is a spin-off. There is, I'd have never seen anybody miscategorize something as a spin-off, so... Yeah, I mean, I did say Spiral earlier, but to be fair, I can see why you would call it a spin-off. That one's kind of in between, so yeah. Let's just move on to prequel sequels already. A prequel sequel is when a sequel is made with the intention of being a sequel, but it takes place before the first one. I did say earlier that a sequel had to take place after the previous entry in order to be a sequel. If it takes place before it, but it's still being presented as one, then it is a prequel sequel. The best example of this is Five Nights at Freddy's 2. That's it. That's basically prequel sequels explained. There's really nothing else I can say about them. Midquels are very similar to prequel sequels, except there is one big difference. Where a prequel sequel takes place before the previous film, a midquel takes place during it. The only example of this I can remember for certain is Lion King 1.5, but I am pretty sure that most of the Disney direct-to-video sequels are midquels. At least a few of them are. So prequels are very similar to prequel sequels, but there is one big difference. Well, prequel sequels are marketed as the next main entry in the franchise. Prequels are marketed as prequels. Except the Star Wars prequels, because those ones are the weird exception.
The exception that proves the rule.
No, it doesn't really. I'm just saying that a prequel is when a franchise makes something. If it's a prequel and not a prequel sequel, they will tell you it is a prequel, okay? Some examples of this are the Star Wars prequels, The Hobbit, and Leatherface. Strangely enough, reboot sequels are something that, for the most part, I really only see with horror movies. And, okay, let me explain what it is. A reboot sequel is when a sequel to something is made which ignores some of the previous movies, but doesn't ignore all of them. I think I need to give an example to really help you understand what I'm talking about here, and this is the best one I can give.
You feel it, don't you, Michael?
Halloween 2018 is a sequel to Halloween from 1978, but ignores every other sequel. That is what a reboot sequel is. This is not even the first time Halloween has done a reboot sequel. There's also Halloween Water. Okay, I'm sorry, I mean Halloween H2O, 20 years later. Seriously, who came up with that title? That one is also a reboot sequel because it ignores all of them except the first two. Okay? Other examples of reboot sequels would be Texas Chainsaw 3D, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022, and some of the Terminator movies are also reboot sequels. By my definition, soft reboots and reboot sequels are actually kind of similar. While a reboot sequel just ignores some of the previous material, a soft reboot makes it where something in the story happens that forces the previous material to be decanonized. The best example of this I can give is Mortal Kombat 9, because in that story, Raiden literally sends a message to his past self, which resets the timeline and erases all of the previous games from continuity.
He must win.
So while some people will claim that the Suicide Squad is a soft reboot, it actually isn't, because the events of the first film did still happen.
Please explain to me what is going on.
That little spell that you botched where you wanted everyone to forget that Peter Parker's Spider-Man, it started pulling in everyone who knows Peter Parker's Spider-Man from every universe into this one.
From every universe?
Who are you? Where am I?
I think it's better we don't engage with them because, frankly, the multiverse is a concept about which we know frighteningly little.
Multiverse sequels are something that are not very common right now, but will probably become very prevalent very soon. A multiverse sequel is when a storyline in a reboot continues the story of a character from the previous version. And it has to be the exact same version of the character that it is continuing. The only examples of this right now are, as far as I know, Spider-Man No Way Home, Turtles Forever, the 2012 Ninja Turtles meeting the 1987 Ninja Turtles, and Crossover Nexus, and Ben 10 Alien Extinction. That is, if the creators will stop being stupid and just admit that one of the Bens in the episode is Ben Prime, because if none of them are, then the whole episode is kind of pointless. So I completely forgot that Crisis on Infinite Earths existed until just now, so yeah, that's also a multiverse sequel. And in the near future, since we're going to be getting a lot of multiverse stuff in the MCU, obviously that means we're going to probably be getting a lot more multiverse sequels. However, the only ones I know for certain at the moment are going to be, even though they're not part of the MCU, are The Flash, and if that rumor that Spider-Man is going to be across the Spider-Verse is true, then it will be as well. Spider-Man! Well, that's basically it. These are all the different kinds of sequels, reboots, remakes, and all that stuff. I'm just going to put them on screen now because I really do not remember them all off the top of my head, and I'm not opening up my script, so yeah. Anyway, though, that's really it. Just get it right, please, in the future, because I'm tired of getting mad at people for miscategorizing these things. Otherwise, though, the only other thing I really want to say is that The Fastest and the Furious is not my best Photoshop work. I've made way better stuff, so do not judge it based on that. That one was a joke and not meant to be taken seriously.